So tutorial 4, we're going to look at climate change and its impacts on spatial changes in biomes, habitats and animal migration patterns. Before I begin, I think it's fair to say that we're likely to see a lag between changes in climate and changes in the location and distribution of biomes. We're not going to quickly see shifting movement of biomes, but rather a transformation of biomes first and perhaps a degradation. So based on just 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, many biogeographical regions will experience severe ecosystem transformation. So the tundra, the Arctic tundra and the boreal forests are at significant risk of degradation and loss. And trees at the southern boreal boundary are going to die. Other regions such as the Mediterranean, arid regions, the desert environments are likely to expand, and the tropical rainforest is likely to see some dieback. So already we are seeing shifts in climatic zones. So for example, in these graphics here, we see that the tropics on the right since 1980 have expanded half a degree north and south per decade. And since 1902, the Sahara Desert has grown 10%, advancing as much as 500 miles northwards in winter months. We've also seen a shift to the west of the 100th meridian, so the climatic boundary has shifted roughly 140 miles since 1980. And on the right-hand side, we see the shift to the west here of Tornado Alley. And these are showing significant patterns of climatic shifting. Permafrost regions in the Arctic have also shifted northwards. And this is showing that 80-mile poleward shift over a 50-year period in Canada. So climatic patterns are changing. And this is likely to have an impact on biomes. But we think the shift in biomes will take a much longer period of time. But the impacts on animal species could be much faster. So a report here by NASA based on 105,000 species of insects, plants and vertebrates shows a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. So with that impact, 6% of insects, 8% of plants and 4% of vertebrates will see their climatically determined geographical range reduced by more than half. This is obviously squeezing these species into much smaller spaces. So for most species, climate change will require a migration towards the poles. And this isn't simple. I mean, one, there's lots of barriers to that migration, natural barriers such as mountain ranges, rivers, coastlines. But then there's also very dense human population and activity, agricultural plains, industrial activity, urbanized spaces, and then this is gonna make those migrations very, very difficult, and it could lead to extinction for some of these land-based species. It's a well-known already. We've discussed this in previous tutorials about the pressure that coral reefs are under due to warming temperatures, mass coral bleaching events becoming annual events now. And the slowing down in the calcification rates in reef building also a problem due to a lowering in the pH. And on the right here, we've got this really scary quote by Charlie Vernon, which talks about a possible mass extinction in terms of the slow decline of the marine biodiversity as a result of reef loss. So animal habitats are under threat. And one example is the Arctic biome, and we can call this a biodiversity hotspot. So in the high latitudes, these have experienced the highest rates of warming, and that's projected to continue into the future. So the global biodiversity outlook suggests that the prospect of ice-free summers in the Arctic Ocean implies the loss of an entire biome. So whole species ensemblages are adapted to life on top of and under the ice. So species ranging from algae, which which support then a whole range of invertebrates, birds, fish, and marine mammals through the food chain. And the iconic polar bear is at the top of that food chain, but the risk is much, much greater and goes well beyond the polar bear story. Another example would be alpine biodiversity hotspots. So Professor Richard Bardgett here at the University of Manchester has studied 7 different mountain ranges. The results not only suggested that warming could impact the way that plants grow in mountain ecosystems, but also that the changes are linked to effects of warming on soils, especially in the cycling of key nutrients that sustain the growth of plants. So Bardgett stated here, a clear message from our findings is that climate warming could change the functional properties of mountain ecosystems and potentially create a disequilibrium or mismatch between plants and soils in high mountain areas. And this disequilibrium is expected to radically disrupt ecosystems. So at best, pushing animals to higher altitudes, and at worst, again, leading to mass extinctions. So animal migration, as we've already seen, is quite complex. So a tally of more than 4,000 species from around the world shows that roughly half are on the move. The ones on land are moving at an average of 10 miles per decade, whilst marine species are much, much faster. So some examples include the Atlantic cod and the Europe's purple emperor butterfly. So according to Camille Parmesan, scientist at Plymouth University, they're moving at rates of around 125 miles in a single decade. So warming climates not only leads to migration of animals, but it disrupts the timing of biological cycles. So globally, frogs and amphibians are breeding on average 8 days earlier each passing decade. Birds and butterflies are reproducing 4 days earlier. So there's all sorts of examples of these disruptions to biological cycles, and that's linked to climatic patterns and shifts that we're experiencing with our seasons. These are really good visualization maps which show the movements of mammals, birds, and amphibians. So in North America, we see that poleward shift of movement. And what this has tried to take into account is some of those barriers, some of those human barriers and natural barriers, which will affect the pathways of migrating species. And in South America, we do still see that poleward shift. You can see a movement to the north. But actually, on the whole, what we're seeing here is a western migration. So it talks here about converging points, including western regions like Ecuador for amphibians and birds, whilst mammals seem to migrate towards central Amazonian regions. So from this, I think we can conclude that there are significant patterns of climatic shifts, but a great lag in terms of biome shifting, but animals are going to need to adapt and find sort of climatic refuge and biome refuge, and so we expect to see significant migrations